I want sub 24. Like, this is, I can make it. In my watch at this point, I'm looking at it and I have no idea how many miles I had because the canopy has screwed up the mileage and with the GPS. So I was like just playing it out in my head. I'm thinking it's this far and I have this much time. And I was like, screw it. And I just started, as soon as I finished that last climb, I started hammering hard. I was sprinting all the way down. This is at night, over canyon edges. And as I got further and closer to the finish line, that I looked at my watch again. I'm like, that time crunch is coming down, and almost just completely reckless. I was the last mile. I was just jumping down, landing, and there was this root or tree branch, I should say, that extended over this drop off on this trail going down. And the entire race, I wanted to just swing off it. And I'm like, that's stupid. Don't, you break your ankle. What are you thinking? And I didn't think twice. I saw and I swung on this thing and it launched me forward and without a beat just kept running. And all I could hear was apart from my heavy metal blasting, was my breathing. I was breathing hard. I mean, just all out. And as I got closer, I saw one of the guys that works at the aid station. And I could hear him on the radio, and he was like, he's rounding the corner. He's crossing the bridge. And and then I just so hard, I had no idea if I was going to make it or not. And I made it with like 26 seconds to spare. And it was, to me, it was one of the greatest moments, in all of my racing. Because it just, to find that power after just such a brutal day. And then completely without any idea if I was actually had a chance of making it, I'm like, I'm gonna go for it. And it was beautiful.
Welcome back to the Yogi Triathlete Podcast. We are your hosts, Jess and BJ, and each week we share stories of people looking, finding, and living their purpose, much of which comes from major life transformation. Today we're bringing you Pete Mortimer, ultrarunner, coach, fellow Squirrels Nut Butter teammate, and someone who turned his life around through the sport of running and has since evolved into a seeker of the toughest races on earth. Races like the Georgia Death Race, a 74-ish mile endurance run with 35,000 feet of elevation change, a race in which you are discouraged from finishing and told simply to show up and die. The Dragon's Back 200 across Wales, which covers 60,000 feet of climbing in an orienteering style stage race. The Orcas Island 100, which is described as cold, wet, dark, steep, and not for the faint of heart. But clearly these toughest races on earth suit him as he continues to seek them and just won the Hurt 100 on the island of Oahu, known for its unforgiving terrain. Pete is passionate about inspiring others and sharing the beauty of trail running. We're excited to dive into the details of this runner's journey and look forward to seeing where our conversation takes us today. Pete, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's when you read all of that, I'm like, who is this guy? I want to meet him.
Yeah, he's like, cool, right? You'd want to interview him?
I kind of just go on to the next one. And then it wasn't until recently where people started talking to me and listing back what I've done. I was like, I have done a lot, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's three. That's three of them. There's more, right? The Cocodona 250, the Bigfoot 200, Tahoe. I mean, it goes on and on and on. It's pretty epic.
Yeah, just means I'm getting older. That's all. You can only put so much into the air.
And you didn't even really find running until your 30s. So if you can take us back to your story, share your story. And I know you've been on the podcast circuit right now with the big Hurt win, but we know you're more than the Hurt 100 champion, and we wanna get to know you better because we literally just met moments ago.
Yeah, so I started running in 2010 as just a way to lose some weight. I was going through a divorce. I was kind of unhappy and stressed. I had a very high stress job, and I needed an outlet. And that was it. Running. I joined this running club, the Phoenix Hash House Harriers, which, they're a drinking club with a running problem. And it was a great way to meet people and just kind of get out and explore different parts of the city and trails. And I fell in love with running after that. It steadily progressed until it became insane.
And did you grow up as an athlete? Did you do sports? Like, where did you begin to like kind of pack on the weight, or was that a lifelong thing that was happening over time?
I played soccer and tennis growing up. Running was probably the worst part of it. I had friends that did cross country, and the thought of running 3 or 4 miles, I was like, forget it, even though I was already doing that at like soccer practice. So, and then I joined the military at a young age when I was 18. And after getting out, I just kind of ballooned up. Well, I actually ballooned up while I was in the military towards the end, but just bad habits, stress, all that stuff. And my heaviest, I was like 250 pounds, which I'm a tall guy, 6'3", but you can't hide that much weight. So.
What are you down to now? Like, what's your race weight?
Generally around 170. I weighed myself after the Bigfoot 200, and I think I was 165, which I weighed more in high school. That's kind of crazy to think about.
I think it's this thing about stress. Like, stress can just pack on, and we've had guests on the podcast where it's like all of a sudden you turn into, you realize you're like, wow, I'm at 250. Like, how did this happen? How stressed, absolutely. And then you change jobs. So it sounds like maybe job was part of it. How do you manage that now? Do you feel stress, or do you feel like the running is the outlet?
Yeah, running is definitely the outlet. If I even on my rest days, I have a hard time sitting still. Normally I would, just stare out the window, like thinking of like, oh, I could go up this mountain today, but I got to be strict. I got to take a day off. But now I've bought a gravel bike. So now even on my rest days, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go out and it's rest, right? But yeah, it's stress is definitely, for me, running has been the biggest outlet. I work in the hospital. I work many different hospitals, travel a lot. I never know where I'm going to be week to week. It's always a surprise. So it's nice in the fact that I can take all my stuff with me, and then just wherever I'm at in like Sedona or Phoenix or Flagstaff, or I can just pop out for a run in all these amazing different places. But if I don't get it in, then I definitely feel it building up inside. Even if it's just going out for just a couple miles, just to slow down and just kind of breathe.
Yeah, I think some runners get really caught up with like, well, it's only a couple miles and, I'm training for a 200, like it's not enough. But you're saying here, like, it's enough. And I mean, we agree with that. But how'd you have to learn that?
Oh, patience. Just getting older, I think. Even today, I went out for a 6-mile run, and I'm like, oh, it's not even an hour. But I'm like, just relax, take it in. You're getting some exercise. You're, doing a little bit of heat training. Just take it for whatever it's worth, and just a couple of miles sometimes can just totally change your mindset. I mean, I tell people all the time, and like, even if you're not a runner or a hiker, just go out and walk in nature, just take it all in. If you want music, fine, or unplug. I mean, that's just, I don't feel like we did it enough as humans anyway, let alone with the pandemic, that a lot of people just shut themselves in. I mean, there's no better time. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no better time.
Yeah, you gotta get out there. Like it feeds the soul. I think it really feeds the soul. And I like that you touched upon the headphones versus non-headphones. Like, at first it doesn't matter. Like, get yourself out the door, whatever it takes, like to get on the other side of the front door. But then you start to open up this box where you're like, oh wow, there's a lot happening out here that I'm missing as I listen to music. And maybe if I just sort of meet myself with those emotions or feelings of, if you're on the trail, maybe emotion of fear, or like what's out there, or, what's around the next corner, you beam into presence, like you beam into this experience that's happening right now. And I love that. I don't know if you've discovered that, if you run with music, or you personally, like to just be out there with nature.
I like both. I listen to podcasts sometimes. I work even from the trail. I have a job where I've got to be on call all the time. I've taken work calls on top of Mount Humphreys and had to like add surgeries into the calendar and like order stuff for like the next day just because it's like it's all time based. So I just take it for what it is. And there are days where my phone's getting hammered and I'm just like, oh gosh, I wish I could just put it in airplane mode. And I save those days for the race when I could actually turn off my phone. But I love listening to music, all types. In fact, a lot of my pace in races is based on the type of music that I'm listening to. So I'll always start off a race with like these epic soundtracks from big movies, like Gladiator or Braveheart, and just kind of you get goosebumps. And then as you're running through these mountains and you're listening to Lord of the Rings, you just like, oh man, it forces me to slow down. And then later on in the race, I would need a little adrenaline push. I'm like, all right, here comes the heavy metal. I'm going to put that on, or techno, or whatever it is I'm feeling at that moment, and just go with it. And then you just, I do it so much in my training anyway. You just get a good song, and like you could feel like crap at mile, 5 or 6, and then like a good song comes on at mile 7. And you're like, oh yeah, this is amazing. And then the click, click, click of miles just go by, and then you're like, I'm done. So I really enjoy it. But again, not afraid to unplug as well and just take in nature. But in my experience, I've run into enough bears and wild animals that ignorance is bliss. So I don't want to hear what's going on in the dark of the night. I'd rather just listen to music.
I like it. That's a strategy. So I love this club that you joined, the drinking club or the running problem. And I think that it just gives permission to people, like whatever your access point is, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your access point is. I started meditating because I was told that it was going to help reverse aging, right? Like I wasn't really looking for enlightenment at that point. I just wanted something to not have a panic attack. And I was like, well, that's a bonus. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you enter in. But how do you get from the drinking club with a running problem? Where does it go from there? Because were they trail runners or road runners? Like what's your introduction to racing?
The first year was just, I think when I started running with them, I could run maybe 2 miles and that was it. I was just gassed. The beauty about that group is you don't know, you show up at a place and it's always random, like in different parts of the city. And like this club's all over the world, by the way. You can just literally show up in any city, show up at the running club and then go run with these guys. They're amazing. But yeah, the point of it is you don't know where you're going to be running. You're chasing somebody, the hares, and they're leaving a trail ahead of time, leaving these marks with chalk and flour. And so they're trying to lead you to the beer stop along the way. So the point of the run is to work together, essentially. So you have runners and walkers, and there's generally a right way to go and a wrong way to go, and you have to follow the marks and figure that out along the way. And there's these checkpoints, and when you get to the checkpoints and okay, I'm on the right trail. But from there, again, you can find the wrong way to go. So it doesn't matter how fast you run, you can always end up back in the middle of the pack. And so it's a great social, to me, experiment. I don't know. It was started by the military in the early 1900s. And as a way of these military soldiers getting some exercise, and then they'd finish at the hash house, hence the hash house, and then the harriers, the runners. So there's the hares that you're following, and you're trying to track them down and catch them. And if you're fast enough, you can get them. But that's where the checkpoints and the false trails come in. So they're trying to keep you back. And eventually you get to a beer stop and everyone socializes and has a beer or two. And you don't have to drink. It's not mandatory. And then from there you go on to the next part of the trail, and you end up generally around where you started. Sometimes they have an A to B. But it's just, and then we all gather up afterwards and we kind of do this ritual where we sing songs, and they're all vulgar versions of regular songs you've probably heard, and people just make up their own songs, and we call people out for things that happen on trail, and it's kind of just a little mini celebration. And then we disperse, we go our own ways.
Oh my God, I love this club. It kind of sounds like it was put together over a couple drinks, for sure.
Oh, I'm sure. And it has evolved. I mean, you can go. I've hashed in Hong Kong and different parts of the world, and you can just go, and they're all generally the same. They have different marks, but the spirit is always the same. And that's what's great about it. I mean, it's not inclusive to only certain. You don't have to have hashed before. You can just show up. And there's many other. I mean, you can go deep into it, and then we've got like special names for each other and all this stuff. And you don't get to pick it; they pick it for you, and it's normally something vulgar. I don't want to go into my name. You can show up at a hash, I'll tell you. Okay. But when I was running with these guys, I started like doing these 6-7 mile road runs or trail runs, and I was like, wow, I've never run this far before. And I just couldn't believe it. And because you don't know where you're going and you're working together, it's over before you know it. And you just like, holy crap, I just ran 7 or 8 miles. And so at this point, I was like, I kind of want to try a half marathon. I knew some of the runners in the group, and they were competitive, or they were do full marathons, which I thought was just totally out of my league. And I trained for a half marathon. I did that in 2011, I think. And then after finishing that one, I was like, maybe I'll try full. And then a year later, I did my first full marathon, and I finished in like 3:15, which was pretty good for me. I missed Boston by like 10 minutes, and I had no clue what I was doing either. I just been in a skiing accident 2 weeks prior, giant head laceration, and I had a contusion in my femur. Hit this rock, like last run of the day, classic, and they had to like put me in a toboggan and like put me down the mountain. And I couldn't walk properly for the first, week. My quad kept firing, snapping back and forth. I'm like, if I don't get a brace, I'm going to rip my ACL. And I was just limping. And I'm like, well, this is it. I'm not going to be able to run this marathon. And I was just taking tons of ibuprofen, which I never do. I normally don't take anything, even for a headache. And just doing whatever I could. I bought a mountain bike, this cheap mountain bike, and I'm like, I want to run this marathon. And I asked an orthopedic surgeon if I should do it, and she said no, and I did it anyway. And I didn't know anything about salt or nutrition or anything. I just kind of ran through it, and after I finished, I was like, wow, I think I could qualify for Boston maybe, and then progressed. I trained for another year and tried to qualify for Boston a couple times and just failed. I was reaching this point. I think I really hated the road running, and I was doing a little bit of self-sabotage. I would do all the training, and then before race day, I would just go eat horrible, or just, even one classic story. Went out at CIM years ago, with several friends, and it was to see California International Marathon. It's a big one. And the day before, we went out to a hash and had a few drinks, and that, after it ended, just progressed to just keep drinking until 1 the next morning, and eating we're up late, we're eating nachos and all this horrible food. We didn't get back to the house until like 2:30. And woke up at like 4:30 for this thing. And it was, I'm trying to remember what year this was. It was one of the coldest years on record. I mean, it was so bitterly cold. The water from the aid stations was just spilling, and it was just turning into sheets of ice on the course. And I was so hungover. I forgot my earbuds, which I couldn't listen to music, which a whole marathon on the road was like, that was just double torture. And then just freezing the entire time with this giant hangover. And I still finished in like 3:40, which I'm kind of proud of. But then I had to wait for everybody to finish. And, that took a while for my friends to come in. And 2 of my friends were dressed up as Smurfs. And they looked like the saddest Smurfs when they came across that finish line, because they all endured the same pain as I did. So, but yeah, there was a lot of that early on, and I started to really hate the road running. And at one point, I had a bad experience at the Tucson Marathon, and my partner, she's like, "Why don't you try trail running?" So I did. I got into trail running for a bit, and I just liked the difference. The less crowds, the community, the volunteering, the whole 9 yards. So it's just kind of stuck with me, and I've done a few road races since. I did qualify for Boston years later without trying, just because trail running made me a stronger runner. I just, but it's not really, roads aren't really my thing.
There's so much in this story, but what I keep pulling, what keeps like standing out to me is this thread of, kind of gnarly experiences that I think were preparing you for what you do now. So like those hash runs is kind of like your first taste of like orienteering in a way, right?
Oh,
and yeah. And then the crazy ski accident, and then doing the marathon, like showing up in a way that, you're not 100%. And then the all-nighter before CIM, and it being really cold. So just suffering. Although I think the cold might have helped, because if I remember like the hungover days, you're just so hot. You're so hot. Like maybe the cold helped to just kind of like keep the inflammation down. I don't know.
It was fine while I was running, but afterwards I had to wait around, and I didn't have anywhere to go. So I'm just standing there. I didn't have any clothes or anything. And I'm just literally my little foil, shawl, just trying to stay warm. And I mean, you're already hungover. It's miserable. You just want to go to bed.
I thought you were going to say you finished and then you went to the beer tent after that race.
Oh, I probably should have. Hair of the dog.
Yeah, but I feel like there's this theme that like you were kind of preparing for what you do now. You were having these experiences and you kept moving through them, like despite. So you do this trail run, but word on the street is, didn't you DNF that first trail run?
I did. Yes. My first, that was another story. So, my first trail race, I was really excited. It was a 26K out. It was a night run out in I think it was Fountain Hills in Phoenix, where they do the Javelina 100.
Yep.
So I show up early, I'm getting ready, and I get called into work completely on the other side of the city, which, it was probably an hour and a half drive, like speeding. And I got called into work. I'm like, well, this is it. I'm not going to get to race today. So I drive all the way to work, and I go up to the surgery, and they're like, oh, we're running a little bit behind. Of course, everything's always delayed. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to go drown my sorrows in some mozzarella sticks and a bacon cheeseburger. And so I go, and I'm just, this is back when my nutrition was absolutely horrible still. I mean, it was just coming off the road. So, but yeah, just eat this huge gut bomb of a meal, and then go upstairs, and they're like, oh yeah, the case canceled. So I look at my watch, I'm like, oh, I can make it. Speeding, I can make it. And I get across town, right before the start line. It was 30 seconds before they started. Got all my stuff and went. Fell twice into a cactus. Just thorns everywhere. I mean, I never trail run before, ever. And it's at night. I just no idea what I was doing. And it was a 2-lap race, and I DNF'd after the first. I was like, my stomach was wrecked, and I was just picking thorns out. And my partner, she finished both laps. She was like one of the few of our group that did. And which was a little embarrassing to me. I was like, God, I do marathons. I can't even finish a 26K. But I never had so much fun. It was a party. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try another one of these things. And then I started talking to some friends, and I heard about a 50-mile. And I was like, there's 50-mile races? And yeah, at first I was like, there's no way I'm ever doing a 50-mile race. And I think in 2014 I did my first one.
Yeah, but then you progressed pretty quick. I've got a little, where is it here?
Like a month later.
Yeah, like you progress. You do a lot. You do a lot that year. 2014, your first ultra, and then I have that same year, you did your first 100-mile. Like a couple months later, right? Yeah.
It was, I think, the 50-mile. Well, I did for my first 50-mile race, I did a 40 or a 75K, which is a 46-mile like training run. And then I think I finished third in that one. And that was also at night, and that was probably like late August. And then 50-miler October, and then basically the end of October was Happily in 100. So I figured, I do 50, I do 100. And I slogged my way through it. It wasn't pretty, but...
Can you speak to, because as we progress in ultra, right, you're like, okay, I can do a marathon, I can do a 50K. If I can do a 50K, like I can do a 50 mile, because 50K can be anywhere upwards of 33, 34 miles. You're like, I can do like another half marathon or so. And then you get into I can do 100K because that's 12 miles more. And I haven't done a 100-mile. But can you speak to the jump from like 50 mile or 100K to 100 mile? Because I've heard that that's it's a different beast, right? Like the 100-mile is a different organism.
Yeah, I would say to anyone, I mean, the 50-mile, even to the 100K, you can get by mostly on just, good training, getting there. The 100-mile is nutrition, because everything after is just, it's entirely keeping like the engine running. When you've run that many miles, if you put in the training already, your muscle memory's there, you're clicking away. But if you don't have the fuel going, then that's when you bonk. You have these ups and downs, electrolytes, that sort of thing. There's a lot of, today it seems like there's a lot of fast marathoners that are switching over to ultras, and they're running a lot of 50Ks, 50 mile, 100K, and they can just fly on these things. Now, they can not every day they're going to have a great day doing that, because, even in the 100Ks, 50 miles, you have to be, a little bit more strict with your nutrition, but even more so in the 100-miler. I think it's doable for anybody. I've seen a lot of folks that started, with a 10-mile run, for example, and then did a 50-mile and then did a 100-mile. No problem. It's up to them whether they like it or not. I think if you do all the right training and you do it properly, you're probably going to enjoy it and you'll be back and do some more. But if you don't and you just kind of get to the finish line on all fours, and you probably just put that little tip in your hat and then move on to something else.
And I think you got to be willing to figure it out. You got to be willing to figure it out. And I'm assuming this is what you're doing, is you're learning trial and error, especially at the beginning. Learning from each race and moving on. But were you working with a coach, or were you doing this all yourself with maybe the consensus of friends and things?
Early on, I didn't have a coach. I don't think I got a coach until about 2016, maybe. Before that, I would take a lot of advice, and then I wouldn't listen. I would just go out and completely throw it out the window. And, I'm stubborn that way, but it's not that I didn't hear them I took it in, I took the advice, but I also want to feel what it's like when you hit your lows and just all these different things. I mean, and as a coach too, I think it makes you a better coach, right? You can go and you can say, I can relate to this because I've gone through this. And whereas if you haven't, then it's how are you going to relate to your athlete? So I just, over the years, I've just learned the hard way in everything that I've done. And, you said, I don't like suffering. I don't know. I guess I genuinely do. And I keep putting myself into it. And once you do it, I'm just like, oh, that wasn't so bad. But you lose scope. People, when you start talking about the stuff that I've done, I'm like, holy crap, I forgot I've done this. Or I don't even think, when I finish something, even when I do well, sometimes I'm like, oh, that was okay. I could do much better. I'm always, being critical of myself that way.
Well, it becomes normalized, I think. And, because I'm the same, I'm a coach myself, but I love to, and I won't give anything to our athletes that I haven't done myself or learned from, or tremendously learned from. And I firmly believe you got to experience it. And in what thread I see with you, every step of the way, whatever, your partner said, get on the trails, you've never gotten into the details of well, what shoes do I need to wear? What watch do I need to have? What pace do I need to, what is the ideal mileage? Like you've always just gone through with it and had this very thing that we're talking about, which is experience, and have your own experience so that you have your point of reference, for you. And
Sure.
yeah, taking in information is great, but I believe firmly, and you said the key word there is feel it. Like you really need to feel it for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I even, there's a few people I'm coaching right now. I just recently started coaching. So, but there's a few that I've been working with over the last year. And, sometimes I will give them specific workouts I know it'll make them suffer a little bit. And, I always talk to them after. I was like, how was it? And they're just like, shake their head at me, or if they go out with me, if they're like, they're going to go out with a run with me, there's probably a good chance that we're going to do something that they're not normally accustomed to doing. And there's most likely going to be extra mileage involved. That's always a given with me. I mean, a lot of people, as they've gotten to run with me, they're like, yeah, if you're going to run with Pete, you're going to get a few extra miles.
And you probably don't tell them what the workout is beforehand. Are you just in the moment? Like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to pick it up here, or do you give it to them?
I always sugarcoat it. I love taking photos of trails of my friends and just whoever we're out, and all different stuff. And some of my favorite photos, which on my screensaver on my TV, is just these amazing places that we've run together, and just they're coming up this mountain, just looking at me like, oh, I hate you right now. Just
Well, I think what you're
that's
giving,
the way I feel sometimes.
and you're giving them an opportunity to be in the unknown, right? So
Sure.
like a lot of times, like I need the workout, I need to know what it's going to be, I need to know how long we're going to go. And I think especially if they're trail runners, they need to absolutely be in the unknown, because you never quite know how long the race is going to be. If you get lost, there's so much unknown there. And, do you come up against that though? Do you come up against I don't want to say against, that feels negative, but like maybe overthinkers or people who are like, but I need to know what the workout is. Like I need to know what I'm doing a week from next Wednesday. And it creates a little bit of like, and how important is it for them to really start to relax into the unknown?
Yeah, my work is chaotic. My life can be chaotic. It's all over the place. And I think everybody should have some of that in their life, and especially during a race, you don't know. I mean, a storm rolls in, or there's a course change last minute. I've heard people complaining, it was 2 extra miles to this, or it's, 54 miles, not 50 miles. And I'm like, well, it just, to me, it is what it is. And that's the race, or that's the adventure. And you feel a lot better just accepting it and just moving on. I mean, if you sit there and talk to yourself and beating yourself up or beating other people up about it, that just raises everybody's stress level. I just don't think it's a great way to go through life, and anything in your job, or I'm not much of a complainer. I don't think I am. I mean, I think most of my friends or family would say the same thing. I just kind of put my head down and suck it up, and I'm kind of that old school 80s child. Just, it is what it is.
I love that. I think you mentioned, I was listening to one of your podcasts where you missed your crew on Leadville, like at the turnaround point, and then you had to go back up over a whole pass. You didn't have your nutrition, so you grabbed like a sleeve of goo blocks and just kind of nibbled on that for the 13 miles. Versus like, where's my crew? Oh my God, I can't believe that they didn't make it. Or, I'm so upset. I can't wait to see them and tell them how upset I am. You kind of quickly shifted to what can I do? And what can get me up and over? Yeah.
And, a lot of times, you just have to have plan A, plan B, and have been through it. I mean, that's, my crews missed me a couple of times. Normally they're all partying somewhere. It's funny. They always seem to miss me at the first aid station check, or wherever they're allowed to see me running late. And I'm normally running ahead or whatever reason. And but it's fun. And but I just don't expect it, and I think just going through those motions of like, oh, I've been through this before, you just kind of have to just take it as is and move on. And yeah, I mean, like, what am I going to do? Just throw in the towel? I'm like, oh, halfway done. I'm like, screw it. I'm not going just because they're not here. I've just run this far, and you train for the race. You're going to do the race. And that's why we have aid stations, or that's, checks, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So, okay. So you do your first 100, then, 2016, you had mentioned you started working with a coach, and this is when you start getting into bigger stuff. You do the Tahoe, 200, which then you go the following year and do Bigfoot 200 and like cut off a day's worth of time.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the jump from 100 to 200. And I've heard that you have kind of a love for these multi-day events.
Yeah, I wish I could do more 200s. They're definitely my favorite, or even longer. I'll do whatever's tougher and harder. It's all about time with me, with work and trying to plan it. The hundreds or shorter distances are easy because you can just fly someone for a weekend, knock it out, and be back. Whereas the 200s to take 2 to 3 days for me, longer for others, and so to me, that's my holiday when I go somewhere. I'm going to have, and it's what greater way of spending some free time than just running through the mountains. Your friends are partying, you get to see them, run with them, and just explore nature. And it's just, to me, it's the best. I wish I could do more of them. After my kids are out of high school, and probably I'll start putting some more, doing more of those. But when I first thought about or came to hear about 200s, for me, it was, there's 200-mile races. And the thought of doing a 100-miler right after I finished a 100-miler was just insane to me. But people were doing them. So I was like, maybe I could do it. And my coach at the time, James Bonet, I was talking to him about it, and he said, I'm like, well, how do you do this? He's like, I've never done 200 miles. I don't know how to train for this. And he's like, if I were to do it, like, I would run like 30 miles a day in 3 days in a row. And I'm like, okay. So I just camped somewhere, and I still do it to this day. This is how I train for him. I camp somewhere and I run about 30 miles a day, and not all at once. I just split it out. I camp. I normally invite others along with me if they want. Just do a big camp out over like a 3-day weekend. We're cooking food, having drinks, and I just run breakfast, lunch, dinner, and you get used to that kind of time on feet, long time outdoors. Don't worry about speed, just get it done. Wake up, you're tired because you've been staying up late, and then you're out there the door again. You're like, whatever I do, I have to get in these 30 miles a day, and I've steadily made it harder over the years with more mountains. And like the last time I did it, I think I spent 3 days in the Grand Canyon. I did like rim to rim to rim, and then rim to river to rim, and then rim to river rim again, or something like that. It was like over 3 days. It was stupid, but that seems to have worked for me. And I would say anyone wanting to do 200 milers, that's a good way of training.
Well, you also said, what can I do that's harder? I've heard you say. So as you progress through this, are you feeling like, when you get to do the 3 by 30 miles, like, how do you make that harder? Like, how is that not enough? Meaning, like, how do you not rest on your laurels and say, okay, well, I've got this locked in, I'm going to do this every time. Whereas you're always sort of, upping the game a little bit.
Yeah. The Grand Canyon was one of those examples. When I first started doing it, I was, running flatter type trails. I put mountains in maybe one day. And now I don't even think about the amount of vertical. I know I want to do whatever I'm doing. I want a ton of vertical in my workout, but it doesn't faze me anymore as much, I guess, just because I've done enough races where it's 30,000 plus feet of climbing in like a 100-miler, or like 60,000 in a 200-miler. And you're out climbing all day, and your legs, once you've wrecked them enough, you're they're wrecked forever. It's all keeping it mental at that point. Just keep it going. But yeah, I think there's something with the 200s that, because you can run you generally running at a slower pace, and you're not burning as much glycogen. You have all this great like food. You're not just eating candy at an aid station. Like some of these aid stations, they're people rolling around with radio flyers and pizza and ice cream and food made to order. So it's unique because you need real food. You're running for several days at a time. But I think there's no other races like it out there. Have you guys done any 200-mile races?
No, I haven't. But we did a short little podcast with Katra Corbett, and I remember her saying like, just do a 200, like forget the 100, just do a 200. She's like, you got sleep stations. She said they're actually easier than 100 miles because you got all this time.
I've met so many runners at these races that aren't even runners. They're just thru hikers. They just hike a lot. And they're like, I hike pretty fast. And they finish these races, and it's just amazing to me. It goes to show the different types of strengths, that work for these different distances. Yeah.
So I had heard your name. I knew about you. And then BJ was telling me that, you got to watch this, YouTube movie, the short little half-hour movie from Aravaipa on the Cocodona 250. And then, of course, you came in second at that. And then we watched the other little video that you did leading up to Hurt. And I loved, like, there was a lightheartedness about you. And I was like, we got to get this guy on the show. Like, I just really I liked your energy. And I liked the way, like, how you were coming across in those videos. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just felt good. So the Cocodona 250 is like no joke. There's 10,000 feet of climbing in the first 50K. And you come in, I was just revisiting this, like you come in, I think it's called the Tut Hill Aid Station, and the second place guy is there. And he has to take a nap because he's like having sleep deprivation. And you talk about like leaving that aid station after over 200 miles of racing, and you're like, it's on. And your pacer was like, come on, man, we got to get this guy. Like, wow. Yeah. But what I love about the story is that you're like, this is on. And, but then you catch up to him. I can't remember his name. Hawk. What was his first name?
Dax.
Dax, yes. And you say, like, I caught up to him, and like we walked and we were talking. And so I love this titration of being super competitive at 200 plus miles into a race. And then also like the brotherhood or the companionship of your fellow competitor while you're out there, coming together. Can you speak a little bit about that, either in that race or any other race?
Yeah. I've always been competitive more with myself. I'm definitely still competitive with myself. But as I've become a better runner, I don't know, I still marvel at all these other runners, and I'm like, wow, I can't believe I get to run with you guys. And, just to me, they're like this upper echelon, and I'm just like, maybe if I could just, get a little taste of just that. And, but I mean, Dax is one of those guys. I mean, he just, from the beginning of the race, I could see he had just had a tremendous amount of strength to him. He just, he powered through without sleep. Which, I haven't done before. I slept an hour and 40 minutes during that race, and I can't imagine just having no sleep. He said he fell right before Tut Hill. I don't think this was in the movie, but he told me he fell right before Tut Hill, and he basically woke himself up, and he didn't know which direction he was going or where he was. And, I've sort of been there, like, in other races where you get so sleep deprived. And that's where all these hallucinations come in on these bigger races. I know a runner that threw her poles off the side of a cliff because she thought it was the only way to save her. There's another person that was found in the forest. They saw his tracker, and he's like talking to Coca-Cola bottles. And the amount of things that can go through your head at that time, and so when I saw him, and as tired as he was, we were both exhausted. For me, it was easier to understand like how much time we had left still. And but then, and I was thinking, I'm like, well, we still got to go over Mount Eldon all the way to finish. But at the same time, how strong we were both moving together. And we were like during that when we were running through Walnut Canyon, it was atrocious how we were running. I mean, it was just, we were just hammering as hard as we could because all we could see was each other's lights. And I had just had so much respect for him. I mean, I chased him for like a day and a half, when I actually started picking up my pace in Cottonwood. I mean, he was already ahead of me. And I think at this place I was like fourth or fifth. And when McKnight dropped and I kept creeping, I would run into people like on their ATVs and they're like, yeah, there's a guy like just a mile up there. You're going to catch him. And then like 4 hours go by. I'm like, where is this guy? It's impossible. And just every turn I'm going around and it starts like really getting into your mental state. And so I had so much respect for him when I caught up to him. I'm like, God, this is the amount of strength that this guy has. And to me, it's like I get to run with this guy,
So cool. And you end up passing him and come in second in that inaugural race. What's your overall impression of Cocodona 250?
I really loved it. I've run a lot of those trails over the years. Finishing in my backyard is really nice. The stretch of mountains, the Bradshaws, which is the first 30 miles of that race. I drive past it all the time when I'm going to Phoenix or Black Canyon. And over the years, I'm like, oh, one day I'm gonna run in those mountains. And the Cocodona race came up, and that's where we started. And I can honestly say that I never want to run in those mountains again. Just from my experience there, they are hard mountains, and with basically no water options. They're supposed to move a water drop in to aid the runners to help this year. So that'll be good for them. But I don't really have a desire to do it again. It's nothing against the race. I really enjoyed it, and it was great. I mean, the 200s again for me are always just a giant party. I always have a massive crew, ton of different pacers, and we just stretch it out over the couple of days.
And you don't I was also looking at, you don't repeat races that often. So you don't like go target, go over and over again. Is there a reason for that? Or do you just like to take on new challenges, or just, you've already done that, kind of like the Cocodona 250. Now you've done it, maybe move on to the next thing?
Yeah, I'll repeat just the local stuff for training runs. And I always just like running into folks that I don't get to see that often, all the local people. I mean, it's Arizona's got like a huge trail running community. So it's always great catching up with folks. But yeah, the other stuff, I'm definitely kind of a one and done, especially on lottery races. I just, like Western, I get in this year, it's like 7 years, and Hurt was like 6 years. And I after waiting that long, I just want someone else to have an opportunity. They offered me to go back to Hurt, and, I'm flattered, thanks, but I'm on to the next thing. So, and it takes a little bit of pressure off, because I know some races I finished second, and, I'm like, oh, I could go back and finish first. I'm like, nah, it's just, if I'm one and done, I do as well as I can for that day on that race. And then just, that's it. I accept it. And if I crush that day, great. If I don't, then whatever. So it's okay to have a bad day.
I love that. I really do. I'm one to repeat things over and over again. So I love the alternative angle of it, of just like, embrace whatever experience you had. Don't hang on to it. Move on to the next one. Create a new one. Create another one. It may be first. It may be, a DNF. It doesn't matter, but you're going to create another experience, and not holding on too tightly to what's already happened in the past. I like that.
Yeah. And I've had some great race experiences when I just finished, like, in the middle of the pack. And then I've had some race experiences, even when I won, where I'm like, it was okay today. I didn't have as much fun as I thought, whatever, but I took it as it is. And again, that's probably me just being more critical of myself, because, you set this bar too high and your own expectations of how you want to do. And, even when you hit most of the markers, sometimes you're just like, I could do better. So I've tried to, over the years, kind of reel that in and be more realistic.
So you'll be at Western States this year, which will be super exciting. We'll be tracking that because they have amazing coverage now. But I want to touch upon the Hurt, and you've done a lot of podcasts. So I'm going to link to the one you did with Jamil, Aravipa Running. You're on their race team. And I'll link to a couple other ones that you've done. But the Hurt 100 took you 6 years to get in. This is like a crazy race, like terrain. And I think it's like 5 20-mile loops. But what's an overall like memorable, maybe there's more than one like experience in that race, that you just won, which is so epic, dude. That's amazing.
I would say definitely the finish for me. When I took over first place at like mile, I think it was on lap 4. I had about a lap and a half to go. I was like, wow, I'm in front now. I totally wanted this race. Just, I'm going to dial it back and just kind of, all I want to do is finish. And then all of a sudden starts turning, like the strength obviously got me through there. And, then it was like, wow, at this point I was like, well, I'm in front, but if I get passed again, I don't care. Like, I'm just going to keep going and doing the same momentum. I'm not going to change anything. I'm not going to speed up. And, that was my plan for about a half lap. And then I got into the aid station. I was like, we got to go. And I got all my stuff together because my goal at that point was, the way that they come in to the main aid station, you come into the aid station, and when you leave, there's about, I don't know, several hundred feet where you share the same trail, and then it kind of diverges, and it becomes like a loop. So you don't see, when you're going out, you won't see them coming in. So that was my goal. I'm like, I don't want them to see me at the aid station. I don't know how far behind they are. But I want that kind of message to them being like, oh, Pete's already gone. Maybe he's feeling good, or how far ahead is he? And my partner I just asked Siska, I was like, just call me or text me when they come into the aid station, just so I know. It'll take a little bit of stress off. And I'm going up, and I'm about halfway up, and I'm like texting her. I'm like, any news? And nothing. Okay. And then I finished the first climb, and I was on my descent to the first aid station. They're like, oh, they just got into the aid station. I'm like, okay, wow, this is even better. I've already knocked out the first of three big climbs, and so I kept pushing. And then on the way back from the pirate aid station, I saw my buddy Sergio, and I'd only met Sergio. He ended up taking second. And I'd only met him a few months prior. He came out with one of his buddies, and Rod Bean, who his dad used to work for the Hurt 100. And we went out running with Jeff Browning in the Grand Canyon. And went rim to rim together. And then now we're doing this race together. And we were like, first and second, like, can't believe this. And we each hugged each other and jumped up and down on the trail like kids or whatever. Anyway, and then we just kept going because we got to focus. And that last lap, I realized, okay, I've got this thing in the bag. On my way out from Nuano, which is the last aid station climb. But now it was like, oh, okay, I want sub 24. Like, this is, I can make it. And my watch at this point, I'm looking at it, and I have no idea how many miles I had because the canopy has screwed up the mileage, and with the GPS. So I was like just playing it out in my head. I'm thinking it's this far, and I have this much time, and I was like, screw it. And I just started. As soon as I finished that last climb, I started hammering hard. I was sprinting all the way down. This is at night, over canyon edges. And as I got further and closer to the finish line, that I looked at my watch again. I'm like, that time crunch is coming down, and almost just completely reckless. I was the last mile. I was just jumping down, landing, and there was this root or tree branch, I should say, that extended over this drop off on this trail going down. And the entire race, I wanted to just swing off it. And I'm like, that's stupid. Don't, you break your ankle. What are you thinking? And I didn't think twice. I saw and I swung on this thing and it launched me forward and without a beat just kept running. And all I could hear was apart from my heavy metal blasting, was my breathing. I was breathing hard. I mean, just all out. And as I got closer, I saw one of the guys that works at the aid station. And I could hear him on the radio, and he's around in the corner. He's crossing the bridge, and and then I just so hard. I had no idea if I was going to make it or not, and I made it with like 26 seconds to spare. And it was, to me, it was one of the greatest moments, in all of my racing, because it just, to find that power after just such a brutal day, and then completely without any idea if I was actually had a chance of making it, I'm like, I'm gonna go for it. And it was beautiful.
Wow. Where do you think that power came from? Like, where does that power come from? I know you're fit and strong and you're capable of doing it, and you've trained and you raced, and I know you're listening to music and you know that you're in first, and you've got this guy, your buddy, coming up hard on your tail. Like, where do you think that power comes from?
I don't know. I've done it in 200-mile races too, or I've been like 120 miles in and I'm dropping like 6-minute splits, and it's stupid. But I just get so in the moment sometimes. I just feel everything that's around me. I've got the music coursing through my veins, and then that feeds the adrenaline and then the goosebumps, and you play out something's, in your head ahead of time. Like for me, I'm always like, I would love to win every race. I know it's not idealistic, and but when the thing, that you've played out in your head several times is actually happening, and then you're like, I can't it just all feeds one another. And I really, and this is the same when I finished Cocodona, the last mile, I was just sprinting all the way down, and you just, I don't know how to describe it, where I get it from. And I've always imagined, no matter how sore I am or how long I've been running, I can just turn things on like that.
Yeah, that finish line energy. I think we've all experienced it to some degree. It's quite amazing, and I think it really is like, you have to just be. I think it's a product of being present. Like, I think it's a product of just being so fully in that moment that you've got all your faculties, like you've got your highest potential, like right there playing out for you. And it's like, you can't do it at mile 50. Like it's gotta be like the finish line, or somebody's hot on your tail, or you're like going for something like this, sub 24. So, oh my God, that's so awesome. Anybody who's interested in the Hurt, how would you describe that course?
100 miles of hopscotch uphill.
Awesome.
I don't know, that to me, it literally is a dance. You dance most of your way through that race. You can't step on roots. You can't step on rocks, because the rocks are slippery. The roots are slippery. You're looking for all the little mud pockets in between, which get all torn up because you've got hundreds of runners back and forth going, and then it rains, and then it's hot, and it's just all the things that make it just, one of the toughest races out there. There's a picture of me online. I think I was at halfway through the race, and I just had this ice bag under my hat, and I'm just eating this popsicle, and it was the most like euphoric feeling ever, because it was just so miserable out there. I was like, oh my God, this ice cream, this popsicle is like the best thing I've ever had. And knowing that I have to go back out there and suffer again. But I would say to me, it's an island race, so you can expect a lot of vert. But yeah, it has everything that makes it one of the hardest ultras out there.
Yeah, there's a cool documentary on like its origins. I'll put a link for that in the show notes too, which is great. I watched that years ago, and it's always intrigued me, but just looks like slip and slide. It just looks like a really wet, humid, hot, like just gnarly race. Yeah.
Awesome. So one last thing I wanted to touch upon was, through all of this, I know before we wrap this up, Like, how has injury played a role in your racing and training? If you can touch upon that quickly, if you have, because as runners go long distances, things tend to show up, without proper training, and then they'll start to maybe pull away from the sport a little bit, or from the distances that cause that sensation. So have you worked through any of that and gotten through it?
Yeah, most of my injuries now are from me falling, just because I do this like stupid, insane terrain all the time. But that's why I'm like enjoying it while I can. I'm young and spry enough to, as I get older, I'll probably start just doing the easier stuff. But yeah, early on, I had a lot more injuries. Part of that is just learning how to run properly, gait, proper nutrition, electrolytes, all those things play a part. I certainly had tried to run through certain injuries and tried to push through too fast, and it ends up reoccurring. I've had calf strains and like partial tears, and especially early on when I started cranking up the vertical, because again, the way I went from a 50 mile to a 100 miler, and then it was just like just go like, oh, what's more vertical, what's harder. And so it for me, it happened real fast, and I've really had to kind of work on that over the years with some strength training. I go to a stretch therapist quite often. I call her my stretch ninja. It's pretty comical because she's like half my height, and she's like flipping my legs all over the place. It's like this giant, I look like a giant next to her. But yeah, those sorts of things are important. I go for a massage to keep relaxed and stuff, or just like after any big race. Again, these are things that I never used to do when I was younger. But yeah, for a lot of people, it's just, I think if for anybody, if you push too hard, too fast, you're asking for trouble.
Yeah. And 8 More Miles is your website and your coaching. What does that mean, 8 More Miles?
So it started as a, pardon the pun, running joke among some friends. Every year we host this run. So I do this thing called the Holiday 100 every year. And it's just a way of motivating everybody to, between Thanksgiving to New Year's, we run 100 miles. And it works out to about 3-something miles a day. And you can do it on your own pace. And everyone goes on there and pledges the amount of miles that they want to do. And we all kind of have this secret, like, well, we have a Facebook page, and then we just kind of, motivate each other. We see each other's out, everyone's going out there. And so they're like, oh, I need to be going outside and doing this as well. And I try and set up extra challenges each year. Like we've done push-ups or planking or fastest mile time, that sort of thing. And part of it is every year on Thanksgiving weekend, I take a bunch of folks out across at the National Trail in Phoenix, which is it's roughly 15 miles from point to point across the entire South Mountain. And it's really beautiful. It's got all these different landscapes. There's a cave that we always take our picture in, and I feel kind of like it's Lord of the Rings. I'm leading all these folks all over across this single track on this mountain, and it dips from like, one side to another. You can see the city, and then all of a sudden it's just mountains all around you, and they're gone. And well, one year I set up the drop car points, and they're doing all this construction. I'm like, crap, and I have to park about 2 miles downhill. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to say anything because it's just going to break them if I add this extra 2 miles on here. And we get to the halfway point during the run, and they're like, how much further? I'm like, it's eight more miles. And they're like, okay. And then a couple of miles later, it's getting really hot. And I'm like, how much further? I'm like, looking at my watch, I'm like, 8 more miles. And they're like, wait a minute. And then I have to break the news to them, like, the cars are a little further than last time. And so, yeah, they're all angry with me, but not really angry. Just like, this is kind of what we've learned to expect from you. And, at the end, we all have beer and stuff. So like waiting in coolers and drinks, and everyone's fine. But it's actually happened a couple times, whether it's like they close the gate or whatever going on. So now I just kind of leave it up to like, I don't know what's going to happen to you this year. Maybe it'll be 15 miles, maybe 17 miles. And we always have a bunch of folks come out, and then we all go out together and have lunch afterwards. It's really great. But I've kind of used that as my mantra over the years, and because you can always go 8 more miles. It's just, it doesn't matter what anyone tells you, how long the race is going to be or where you're going. You can get lost or things happen, and it's just 8 more miles.
That's awesome. That's the perfect place to wrap it up. I love it. I'm so glad I asked about that, because I see you light up when you talk about community, and you really do live what you say, which is like, inspiring people and sharing the trails with them. And that's awesome. I love it. I think that probably fuels your speed as well. For sure.
It really does. And the coaching thing for me is new. And that's one of the greatest things. I tried it for about a year, and I'm like, seeing if I like it, but seeing the progression from the athletes and they're doing it. And the beautiful part about it is like, they had a little doubt that they could do it or these things. And then every one of my friends that over the years I've gotten to, like, they're running, 5 or 6 miles, and next thing you know, they're doing a 100-mile race. And it's just, you kind of like egg them on ever so slightly year by year. And then before you know it, you've got a full-blown Ultrarunner on your hand.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it.
Nudging. Love
Pete, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's good to get to know you.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much as well. It was a pleasure talking to you.